The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the day 6 of this Rohatsu, 8-day basically, Sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. And I'd like to speak of the Bodhisattva vows today, along with a few other things. And I'll preface it by saying that as Sesshin goes along, we are unwittingly letting go. And part of that letting go is letting go of what we have kept in place in a sort of self-protection. Our self-image as somebody, whatever, capable, certainly, whatever else. And a Sesshin often, it also encompasses being a good Zen student. And the flip side of that is the common experience of feeling like we just don't have what it takes. We're failing at this practice. We just can't do it. We're never going to come to awakening. But if you recall, that's exactly the third of Mara's tricks, trying to dissuade the Buddha from his practice. And that's it as well for us. We have our own Mara, our own fear of becoming free, actually. In the beginning of practice, for the first years, we're getting accustomed to doing the practice. And sometimes there's a struggle, but often it's just a struggle with what the heck is this practice? Now, what was I supposed to be doing in the Zendo? But then, particularly as the Sesshin would get further along, particularly when we are of advanced practice, we begin to realize at some deep level, not necessarily consciously, but deep level, that our self-identity is being seen through, at least to a certain degree. It's slipping out of place. It's not the firm protector that, or subject to protection, that it has been. And as you always know already, as we grow, we have experiences. And particularly if we've had negative experiences and we're sensitive people, those experiences inspire us, because they're painful, to kind of develop a shell that is self-protecting. And part of that shell is a self-image. A major part of that shell is a self-image, actually. And as we are beginning, increment by increment, to see through that self-image and realize it's just like the two-dimensional cutout papers that represent clothes that you put on paper dolls. They're not real. And if they're not real, then who are we? And that can be a very frightening thing to consider. In fact, we try to avoid considering it. Yet, in essence, that really is the life koan. Who are we, really? Who are we? When Monk Myo was pursuing the brand new sixth patriarch through the forest, caught up with him, and couldn't lift the robe and the bowl, which the sixth patriarch had placed on a rock and then hidden himself. And so Monk Myo called out, lay brother, I didn't come for the robe and the bowl, I came for the teaching. And so Hui Neng came out from where he was hiding and said, okay, let's sit zazen, and then I will teach you. So they sat for some length of zazen. It's not said in the writings how long. And then Hui Neng said to the monk, when you were pursuing me thinking of neither good nor evil. In other words, Monk Myo was so focused on tracking the sixth patriarch that he had no self-awareness. When you were pursuing me, thinking of neither good nor evil, where then was your original face? The face before your parents were born. And that, of course, is one of the breakthrough koans. We don't have and will never be able to have a picture of that face, and yet that's who we really are. But as we get closer to letting go the artificial face that is our self-image, fear begins to come up at some level, and we begin to try to hold ourselves back. And one of the ways we hold ourselves back is by thinking we just don't have the capacity, whatever it is, to come to awakening. So that said, let's talk a little bit about the 4 Bodhisattva precepts. A Bodhisattva, as you already know, is a person who holds off the final enlightenment until after all beings have been liberated. So the first vow is, sentient beings are numberless, I vow to liberate them. Sentient beings live here. Of course, out and about as well, but here's where we work. Sentient beings are all the places in our mind produced by conditioning where we're caught. And where we're caught sometimes doing dysfunctional things, where we are caught reacting in anger or irritation when that self-image is impacted negatively. And that leads to the next subject, which is Dharma gates. Dharma gates are, well, I think I would say infinite rather than boundless. I vow to enter them all. I vow to master them. There are many ways this vow is expressed in the different Zen centers in America in English. A Dharma gate is exactly that. Something happens, we get embarrassed. And right there is an opportunity to, if we choose not to turn our backs on it, but if we choose rather to embody it and explore without words, beyond words, the whole sense of it, it can open us to a deeper level of practice, of experience, of a potential awakening. When practice seems to be a terrible grind and it feels like we're going nowhere, in fact, it could even feel like we're going backwards, there is another Dharma gate, another opportunity to really explore. Who is it that has this concern? Where is this person? In your original face before your parents were born, where is this? And to explore it with curiosity. It cannot be analyzed. It has to be felt. And our intuitive nature will unfold, unpack that experience, and we'll gain an insight into it if we allow ourselves to let go enough to experience that. Most of the time, we barricade ourselves against it. We get defensive, we get angry, or we feel embarrassed. We want to go run and hide. There's a lot of ways human beings react when that self-image is impacted. But if we don't run and hide, if we allow ourselves to feel the heat of the anger arising and be 100% present with it, then release can happen and we can come to an understanding. It may not be a conscious understanding, but something lets go when we allow ourselves to experience the energy of that moment rather than the story about it. And this really is deepening practice. It's funny, we get into these seemingly negative mind states, feeling like we've gone backwards 7 miles from where we even started doing practice. We're in this very complicated mind state that's not comfortable at all. And we feel like we've failed. Our practice is tanked. We're going nowhere. And yet right there means your practice is working, because you wouldn't have these experiences if something wasn't being threatened. And that something that is being threatened is your self-image. Our self-image causes us all kinds of problems, all kinds of pain and suffering. Wars take place between countries because of that. Murders are accomplished because of that. It's not very helpful, this self-image. The other side of it is when we are praised and we feel good about ourselves. Well, sooner or later, the other shoe will drop and something will happen, and somebody will get irritated with us for something, or remind us we should have done something that we know we should have done, and we get irritated. Another Dharma gate. Even the pride is a Dharma gate. Somebody says something really nice about us. Hey, that was a terrific speech you gave. Wow, hey, thanks for doing this, when you weren't even asked to do it. And we can feel good about ourselves. Who is it that's feeling this? Where's this me that feels good about what I did? And who's this I that did this? This is a very, very important part of our practice, and I speak of it on this 6th day of Sesshin, because as Sesshin goes along, in the early days, we are getting accustomed again to the more concentrated practice we do, because even if we're sitting a couple hours a day or 4 or 5 hours a day, suddenly we're sitting considerably more than that, and our bodies aren't really used to it. And so there may be some level of pain, and not to mention boredom or frustration. How come my practice isn't going deeper? I've been doing this for years, etc., etc., etc. And that begins to build up as we get more and more subtly threatened with extinction, basically. Because at least in order to have some level of awakening, we have to disappear, at least for a few moments. Who we think we are disappears as we go into a deep samadhi. No self-image can go in there with us, whoever us is. And yet this is something that people fear. Yet, again, this is exactly what's going to happen when you die, and you won't have a choice then. So to go willingly into this unknown, unsteady, anxious, uncertain, and become intimately familiar with not being somebody or losing track of who you are. If you are mentally, emotionally, psychologically healthy, this has great advantages. And here at this Sesshin, every single one of you is mentally, psychologically healthy. And fully capable of coming to deep awakening. So as the days go on, and maybe there's no obvious progress, or maybe there's no obvious kensho, or whatever else, and you're beginning to get feeling a little self-protective, unwittingly, getting a little bit more stiff, a little bit more tight. That's when some of these things are important to know and to remember. Relax into this discomfort. Explore it. Someone once said, the laboratory, that's what the Zendo is. It's a laboratory for learning how to practice. Another person, years and years and years ago, Gordy Bruin at the Rochester Zen Center, who was known as the class clown, basically, of the Rochester Zen Center, and there was some level of assumption around that jollity that maybe he wasn't serious. Maybe he wasn't going to be able to do the practice that well. Well, one Sesshin, he was profoundly focused, deeply focused. And in that Sesshin, he had a kensho. And he said, in response to that, why didn't somebody tell me? Zen practice is about exploring your own mind. Your own mind is also the mind of all beings, including the trees and the snow and the clouds and the wind and the great full moon that's shining now. So, whatever uncomfortable sense comes up, whether it's a feeling of needing to guard yourself, whether it's a feeling of being a failure, whether it's a feeling of anger arising, it does not matter at all what that feeling is. Go right in there, open that Dharma gate and walk right in. It's amazing what could happen when you do. And so now, since it's the 6th day, we will continue sharing Hakuin Eikaku Zenji's Rohatsu exhortations. The 6th night, an attendant brought a cup of tea for the master. He said, when Zen Master Yosai, founder of Kenninji, was in China, he took ill during a spell of excessive heat. An old priest cured him by giving him some tea to drink. When Yosai returned to Japan, he took tea seeds back with him for the palace in Kyoto. At that time, by the way, it was illegal to export tea. China was trying to hang on to the monopoly. Some seeds were later planted in Uji, and some went to Myoe Shonin, who planted them at his temple west of the capital. Because of this, Yosai is regarded as the father of tea in Japan. The virtue of tea lies in its mildly bitter taste, which works to strengthen the heart. When the heart is sound, the other bodily organs also function normally. Myoe said, tea is good for driving off the sleep demon and should be used by those who practice the way. When it comes to strengthening the heart, however, nothing can compare to strenuous religious practice. If you devote yourself to your practice single-mindedly until your arduous effort becomes one with your very being, the divine energy that is within you will shine forth bright and clear. As Zen Master Jimyo said, and Jimyo is the Chinese monk who was so determined to practice at all costs that he would hold an awl at his thigh, so that if he began to fall asleep, he'd stab himself in the thigh in order to keep awake. And obviously it worked. He's well known as a deeply realized person. That could be an extreme level, and sometimes extreme level of exertion is called for, because we need to go beyond ourselves in order to come to awakening. Doing all-night sits, or going to sleep. Each time the opportunity arises is one that demands discernment. It could be highly beneficial to push the envelope in that way. When you sit up late at night or do an all-night sit, in the beginning there can be a period of sleepiness, and you start nodding off, keep nodding off, and then suddenly you wake up again. And you can go deeper that way. There are also times when it's more appropriate to go to sleep. I always pulled at least one all-nighter every Sesshin I went to in Rochester. And I did it Japan before I got so sick. The sickness had nothing to do with pulling all-nighters, by the way. It was, well, I won't go into that. It was totally unrelated. But one night, or one Sesshin I should say, I decided every other night I would stay up all night. And I did. But that was a little bit too extreme. And in the morning going to Doksan, I couldn't even get out of my mouth what my koan was. And Mitra-roshi said, "Go to bed." At another end of the extreme, when Roshi was alive, 9 o'clock was it, lights out, done, finished, no yaza. I do know at least one person that sat yaza anyway, but he was an old Rochester Zen Center person and knew the benefits of it. We need to discern, as I said, what's most appropriate in a given moment for our practice. If we're deeply exhausted, going to bed could be the best thing we do for our practice. Sleeping deeply and waking up whenever we wake up and ready to go again. It could also be most effective on a given night to stay up or to go to bed and then wake up early in the morning. That was another thing I always did at Rochester. For me, staying up was deadly. If I kept going straight from the end of the evening sitting, then I was dead in the water for the next 2 days. And I used to dread the moments when Mitra-roshi, for a period of time there, he would announce on the 6th night and the 7th night, the monjitors, which he called them, the equivalent of the jikitsu, through their great kindness have volunteered, and I thought, yeah, right, they volunteered, to keep the sitting going until midnight. Of course, it's all voluntary. You can leave if you want, and I didn't dare leave. I just struggled through till midnight, and then, as I said, I was dead in the water for the next couple of days. That wasn't working, but I could go to sleep right at the end of the evening sitting and get up at 1 and be up for the next rest of the day, and it was glorious. And my practice was able to deepen as a result. But that's not necessarily what works for everybody. And the reason why we don't have a specific schedule for yaza here at Mountain Gate is each person is different. That's also why we don't have a single practice that everybody has to do during the exercise period in the same room. Why people are allowed to do what kind of exercise most works to refresh their practice and their energy. It's because everyone's unique. And some people will benefit from staying up all night. Other people will benefit from going to sleep. This was brought home to me in one Sesshin years and years and years ago in Rochester, when one of my roommates was a woman who slept every single break time. She slept instead of going to lunch. She slept in the break after dinner. She slept because dinner was formal back then. Lunch was informal, so you could skip lunch. She went to bed right at the end of the evening sitting, and she had a kensho in that Sesshin. Part of our practice is learning to discern, learning to tune in and get a sense of whether it's our head telling us, I want to go to sleep, or whether it's our body saying, I need sleep. When it comes to strengthening the heart, however, nothing can compare to strenuous religious practice. If you devote yourself to your practice single-mindedly, which is true, until your arduous effort becomes one with your very being, the divine energy that is within you will shine forth bright and clear. As Zen Master Jimyo said, the arduous effort expended by the ancients possesses a radiance that cannot help but spread and grow. Spurring students through the barriers. That is the title of the book that when Hakuin was at his lowest. It was after he had heard that the great Zen Master Ganto had screamed when he was being murdered, and it took all the assumption of safety away from Hakuin, who had joined up, who had become a monk because he thought it would save him from hell. And then at one point, after several years of practice, he learned that Ganto had screamed. And he thought, if somebody that great and that deeply realized would scream when he was murdered, then what hope have I? And he quit practicing. He apprenticed himself to a calligrapher. He thought, well, I will become a master calligrapher. After 8 months, he realized he was not going to become a master calligrapher, although I have to say that his calligraphy is an enormous amount of his calligraphy still extant. And so, not knowing what to do next, he was in a temple courtyard at one point where they were airing the books, the scrolls, during the spring. And this happens every year, twice a year actually, in Japan at temples where they will take all the scrolls out and unroll them and let them air. And then they will roll them back up with some kind of powder in them that keeps the bugs from eating holes in them. And then, of course, we have the rainy season over the summertime, and they are in danger of getting moldy. So in the fall, on a clear, relatively dry day, the same thing happens again. So it was one of those days when the courtyard was filled with scrolls, and he determined that he would just grab one of these and close his eyes and point his finger, and wherever his finger ended up, it would tell him what to do next in his life. And so he closed his eyes and pointed in that very book, the spurring students through the barriers. And it came to the story of Jimyo, who, as I said, held the awl to his thigh. He was so intent on practice, he didn't even want to sleep. And the result was he became a great master. And that inspired Hakuin to go back to being a training monk. And the rest we know is history. Spurring students through the barriers says, when you're able to control your mind at all times, your goal of realization is as good as achieved. Now, what does this control mean? It means that when you're tempted to slide off into daydreams or slide off into self-recrimination or slide off into some other mind state that really isn't due to presence, that you catch yourself and you return to the practice, not in a martial way, but in a way that is curious. That face. Where was it when I started to daydream? Only, of course, this is wordless inquiry. You should all deem the arduous effort you put forth in your practice as something of priceless worth. And that is true. Our practice, the effort we put into our practice is priceless, because we're not practicing just for ourselves. We are working towards coming to liberation so that all beings are liberated. So the sentient beings that are here are our caught places, as Ji-san would say, our skewed behavior that was born of conditioning. To release those caught places, gradually we become more liberated. That energy infuses the whole universe and influences countless beings who also become liberated because of that. There was a priest named Bummei from northern provinces who wanted to come to Shoinji. He tried in various ways for over 6 years to gain permission to study here. I told him, to me it doesn't matter how great and celebrated a priest is. He could have a purple robe from the emperor for all I care. If his Dharma eye remains unopened, as far as I'm concerned, he's still a novice. He still needs a heavy dose of scolding and reviling. Anyone who harbors so much as a thought for the world or the slightest feeling of self-importance couldn't derive any benefits from visiting me. Bummei wouldn't give up. I'm no different from a novice, he said. Someone newly arrived in the training hall intent solely on achieving the great Dharma. Please, Master Hakuin, don't begrudge me your compassion. Give me the benefit of your teaching. Let me encounter your thundering shouts. Feel the stinging blows rain from your staff. I am prepared to lay down my life in the pursuit of the way. Hopefully we don't have a lot of that, the stinging blows and the shouts. This, again, is culturally Japanese and Chinese. Our culture is different. We respond positively, not from stinging blows and shouts and recriminations. On the other hand, to be told when we need to do something differently is also important, because otherwise it robs us of a chance to do something about whatever that behavior was that we were asked to change. Bummei wouldn't give up. I'm no different from a novice, he said, someone newly arrived in the training hall intent solely on achieving the great Dharma. Please, Master Hakuin, don't begrudge me your compassion. Give me the benefits of your teaching. Let me encounter your thundering shouts, feel the stinging blows rain from your staff. I am prepared to lay down my life in the pursuit of the way. I allowed Bummei to come. He spent one summer, 3 months of arduous practice, in the training hall where he was tempered and refined under countless blows from my staff. Finally, he broke through. He suddenly realized the great uplifting matter of our school. He vowed when he left that he would remain my student forever. A spirit of single-minded commitment and iron-willed resolve cannot rest until it reaches the final, ultimate attainment of the Buddha's Dharma. Great determination is one of the requirements of practice. Great faith that whatever is going on in your mind, you can work with it, and you keep on going one step after the other, even if it feels like you're stepping backwards, and you will realize what you seek. Great doubt, which has brought all of us here, can be worded in various different ways if you want to use words. Often it is experienced at a level beyond words, a yearning. We could call it a yearning to return to your true home. We could call it a yearning to come to awakening because you know there's something more. It could be called a question of why is there so much suffering in this world? There are many, many different forms of this great doubt, which really is great perplexity. And then great determination. Being truly stubborn, but flexible. Because things change. I leave you with that on the sixth day. May you take it so profoundly deep that there's no question of freedom, true liberation, regardless of your circumstances in life. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.